And finally, we'll wrap up today with efforts by government to outsmart private markets and why it's unlikely to work. Now, last week, Governor Hochul of New York State came out for her State of the State address. One of the topics she covered in depth was unaffordability in housing, how it's becoming harder and harder for your everyday family to join the ranks of homeownership. In her eyes, the main culprit of this is the institutional buyers, your BlackRocks, your Blackstones coming in with their big stacks of cash, all cash offers, quick close. It is very difficult for your traditional family to be able to compete with something like that. She points to some research that suggests by the year 2030, 40% of all single family houses that are for rent are going to be owned by these institutions. She has two legs of a proposal to help rein in these institutional buyers. First is going to be, she wants to make it less of a tax incentive, less tax friendly for institutions to own real estate compared to smaller companies or everyday Americans. So decrease the tax incentives for doing so. Here's the second part that's even more interesting. She wants to implement a 75-day waiting period before institutions can come in and purchase property. So 123 Main Street goes on the market. Joe Smith from across town can buy it whenever he wants to. XYZ company that owns, this is an interesting part here. An institution as defined by the policy that she puts forward, a group or person that owns 10 or more properties. So not 1,000, not even 100, 10. Okay. So if you own 10 or more, you now need to wait, if this were to go through, at least 75 days before you can bid on that property. How much truth is it behind these numbers and how effective is it going to be? John Burns does a lot of research on residential real estate within the United States. His findings are that institutions, so folks that own 1,000 houses or more, represent 0.3% of the overall housing inventory, and groups that own 100 houses or more represent 3.8%. So if we say, okay, even 3.8%, so groups that own 100 or more, how are we going to get from 3.8 to 40% in a 5-year period? How does the math on that work? Well, there's something like 4 million single family houses sold in the whole country last year. So if we take a look at the number of home sales versus how many it would take to get to 40% ownership by the institutions, there are something like 14 million single family houses currently being used as rentals. So the math works out to something like they would need to buy 1 out of every 3 house that were to go on the market through the entire country. And if you look at, the everyday median sales price is right around $350,000, it would take trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars to be able to buy the volume of houses in order to reach that 40% threshold that Governor Hochul claims institutions are going to own by 2030. Now, that's not to say that institutional owners aren't a problem in certain markets. Your Charlottes, your Jacksonvilles, there are certain Sunbelt cities that have been really taken over by some of these larger players where they actually do own 25, 30% of not only all the single family houses currently on the market, but everything that comes on, they are still actively buying. So claiming that institutional buyers aren't impacting local markets is just not true. It is happening in certain parts of the country that are very much in demand. In New York State, no, it's not happening. And in large parts of the country, right, from a total country perspective, institutional buyers simply don't have nearly enough money to be able to significantly alter the housing market. What is happening is that overwhelmingly people that own rental properties aren't BlackRocks and Blackstones. It's me. It's other local investors that might own 5 properties, or they own 6 properties, or 10, right? And it's those people that own overwhelmingly the rental properties in our country. So to point to institutional owners as being the problem for our housing, I think does take away from the underlying issue of first of all, we need to be building more housing. Okay. How effective is this going to be? Well, if we know one thing about private markets, they love to find solutions to problems, right? So this is a problem that's being proposed. How are they going to solve it? Well, the easiest solution is going to be they're just going to create more LLCs, right? So they're not going to be tied to one entity. There's going to be multiple different entities that go up to the 10 property cap. they might form joint ventures with local investors to kind of escape the cap too. So, legally there is some wiggle room there. What I think makes the most sense is that they're going to be more and more active in terms of getting to sellers before properties hit the market. And this could be contacting sellers themselves saying, we want to buy your property. Could be forming relationships with agents in the area saying, hey, we are cash buyers. We will get you paid. You don't need to worry about, inspection issues ruining the deal. We'll get you closed quickly. Bring us buyers. We're ready to buy. Because guess what? If it doesn't hit the market, it doesn't need to wait the 75 days. So that's going to be the most cleanest workaround that I see, that I think makes the most sense. These large players are just reach right out to sellers and make connections locally. Properties won't be hitting the market. So if you are a local buyer trying to buy your property and suddenly there are now less properties hitting the market, how much of a problem are we really solving here? From a seller's perspective, how does this impact you? This is bad news, because now if you are in a market where institutions represent a large portion of the buyer pool, you now have less people trying to chase your house. What does that mean for your value? Well, you're going to get less dollars for your property than you were when there were more buyers. So if you are a seller of real estate, no bueno, you're not going to get as much demand. And if you're a buyer, you might be looking at a pool of homes that hit the market that are smaller, that is smaller than before this proposal were to go forward. So I think the players involved as institutions are probably going to be finding ways to outsmart this. I think there are going to be less properties that hit the market. And if you're a seller of property, you have less people bidding on it. That's no good either. So I think the property is pretty flawed. I think the idea that institutions are going to own 40% of residential real estate is bananas. It's just, there's not enough money to make it happen. And I think the proposal, while it might be coming from a good place, I think just will fail.